Today is Mother's Day, and I want to share a little bit of my mother's story. It's been very much in my heart as I'm watching the news and the anxiety among women across the United States as we look at the possibility of Roe v. Wade being overturned by the Supreme Court. I know it's a delicate topic for Buddhists, and I want to give a perspective, an experiential perspective and a Buddhist perspective on that thinking. So the photo here, this is one of my mother's favorite, all-time favorite photos. My mother is the farthest right, you can tell, right? With her two daughters and her granddaughter. They had gone together to Washington, D.C. in 1992 for one of the biggest demonstrations in Washington, D.C. ever to protest the fear that this U.S. Supreme Court was about to consider the constitutionality of a Pennsylvania state law that limited access to abortions. So this was about 19 years after Roe v. Wade was passed. It was a huge demonstration. She put the girls in the car and they drove Atlanta to D.C. and they marched, and she was very proud of it. I will tell you, if abortion had been accessible and acceptable in 1953, I would not be here. No question about it. I would not be here. My mom's story is not unusual. She found herself pregnant at 15. Can we see this lovely little 15-year-old girl? That was her last high school photo. Because, of course, after that, no more high school. 1953, you have the baby or you give it away, or you keep it, or you have an illegal abortion. I do know from family stories that she debated giving the baby away, as her aunt had done not too many years before that. But according to the stories, my dad went to his mother and said, I have to do the right thing by Beth, I'm going to marry her. He was supposedly on his way to University of Georgia to play football, but that was also over for my dad. So they married. Now, nobody thought that was a good idea, but what to do, really, what to do? As my great-grandfather, her grandfather said, she's made her bed, she has to lie in it, right? That's the attitude. She's made her bed, she has to lie in it. And so my parents married, and my really, really brilliant, actually, very bright, talented mother became what she said, barefoot and pregnant for the next several years. 3 children followed immediately, 2 more right after me, bing, bing, bing. Well, you know that marriage was not a good idea. It was terrible. And it was really hard. I mean, they were teenagers, for goodness sake, right? So they separated, they farmed out the kids. We lived with our grandmother for a while. I lived with my great-grandmother for a while. They separated, they came back together. You know how these things go. They separated, they came back together. There came a point where I think that they had finally decided to call it quits for sure. And my mother found out she was pregnant again with number 4. That time, she made an appointment for an abortion. And the story again goes that the night before she was scheduled to go, this was an illegal abortion, this was still before Roe v. Wade. The night before she was scheduled to go, she had a dream. And the baby in the dream said, Mommy, please don't kill me. She canceled the appointment, and my sister was born. So that was 1961. Roe v. Wade legalized abortion in 1973. Not too many years later, one of her daughters was in the same position. And my mother, well, let's go to this one first. So this was the last family portrait we had. You see, there's no father. There's no stepfather either. My mom raised these 4 kids, doing her best as a single mom to make the best of the decisions and what had happened in her life, right? So that's me in the center, you can tell. My 2 sisters, my brother, and my mom. I'm 18, she's 34. This was my Christmas present to the family, was to all go to Olin Mills and get a family portrait. Never once did she ever utter a regret that she had had these children. Not ever one time. She loved us with all her heart. She did everything she could to help us do well in life. And yet, this very bright, talented woman, as she said, was barefoot and pregnant a whole long time, right? So then when my baby sister, who'll never watch this video, so it's okay to say, found herself in the same position that my mom had been at 15, my mother did not hesitate. She went straight to Planned Parenthood, and that child had an abortion. When her daughter, my mother's granddaughter, was in the same position at about the age of 15, 16, my mother did not hesitate. She took her straight to get that pregnancy taken care of. Not because my mother did not want grandchildren, and not because my mother did not want great-grandchildren, but because she did not want her daughters' lives to be directed by a mistake that they made as teenagers that would change their entire lives. That's my mom's story, right? So in the 70s, when Roe v. Wade was up, I was in that age bracket where it was a very important issue for women of my age, and also the ethics of it was really important. And we debated, when does life begin? When is the moment of conception where a baby is born? Medicine could not tell us. Science could not determine the moment. Christianity could not tell us when exactly this baby becomes when this little egg becomes a baby, this fertilized egg becomes a baby. It was only when I met the Dharma, many years later, and heard teachings from the Buddha on how we cycle in existence one time after another, that I learned that indeed, from the Buddhist perspective, from the Buddhist description, from the moment that that fertilized egg, a consciousness enters that moment, a fertilized egg, life begins. The new life begins. I don't know where else on the planet you would get a description that can define that so precisely. Knowing that, of course, makes a huge difference in how we live our lives. But if you don't know that, you've got a lot of other considerations than your future life when you make this kind of decision. So, of course, I've taken precepts. I took the precepts early on not to kill, and I've taken many more precepts now not to encourage death or whatever, so forth. And I would never in a million years counsel someone at this point to take a life for any reason, if I were asked. Neither would I judge, ever, someone's choice to do what she or he felt they had to do based on their own belief system, to live a life that was meaningful for them, and most importantly, meaning for their child. If I think of all the people I know, and there are many, many, many women I know who have terminated pregnancies, and there are probably many women I know who I don't know they have terminated pregnancies. I don't know anyone who rejoiced at that choice. I know many who still regret it. I think it's so fortunate for us as Buddhists that the Buddha, out of his great compassion, gave us a method to look at the mistakes we made before we knew better and purify using the four opponent powers. So yes, of course, it's better not to have made the mistake to begin with. But when you don't know, that's a part of our ignorance, right? That's what we're trying to overcome ourselves. We don't know. Then we make choices that later we regret, and we purify. I also want to say, and this may sound quite callous, when someone comes to me and asks for advice about euthanizing their pet, I have the same mind. I do not counsel that you go ahead and out of compassion kill your dog. I don't care how much they're suffering. And the Buddhists and non-Buddhist, even based on that counseling, make the choice that's right, that works for them. And I do not judge. The same thing happens when people ask, about what do I do about my termites? The same thing applies. Now I know. It is taking a life. These are the karmic results. And I do not judge when people make the choices they feel they have to make. We also are in correspondence with people now in prison who are convicted of murder, whose lives are completely transformed through their relationship with the Dharma. I'll tell you where I do judge is when the government feels like it has the right to execute living beings on the basis of a mistake in the past. And then finally, I think in terms of just from the Buddhist perspective, we're not proselytizers. As much as I am convinced that taking life is a negative action that results in great harm in the future, I also know that I'm not going to impose my religious views on the views of others. I will share if asked, and I will even share it broadly. But I will not judge on the basis of people operating out of their own beliefs and their own systems. So here's the last photo of my mom. This was my mom not too many years before she died, just a few. She ended up, after a long time, my mom actually had a nice life at the end. She parlayed her very brief secretarial education, which she got so she could support her children, into being a very, very successful media sales rep. For a long time, she did very, very well. She finally, after a couple of rough tries, found a husband that really supported her and adored her to the end. When she was in a coma in the hospital, he would not leave until I got there. And once I was there, he would go. He would not leave her side. She was proud of her children. As I said, she never, ever regretted it. She would often look at the four of us and go, I can't believe you all came out of the same womb, because we were so different. But she loved and appreciated and supported the choices that we made, every direction that we went, even our mistakes, because my mother's whole life was about trying to purify and rectify a mistake she made as a 15-year-old girl looking for a good time, as so many have. So I want to rejoice in my mother. I want to rejoice in the kindness of all our mothers. And also to try to hold this, just to share this story, because what's going on in the country and this side and that side and the kind of anger and the hatred for people's views is heartbreaking. It's so politicizing something that is so deeply, deeply personal. And that, of course, is the complaint, really. How can you take something that is so deeply personal and make it into a slogan and put it and even turn it into a felony, as some states are trying to do this, right? I don't know where this will go. And as from my Buddhist perspective, I'm watching this argument and also staying out of it, because I do have a firm belief about life and the preciousness of life and when it begins and what happens when it's ended. And I also know the story of my mother and the love that she poured into each of us, and the very love that she poured into the girls that she said, please don't live the same mistakes I made. Don't do it. Now, could she cure those lives? No, she could not. We all made our own mistakes just fine. But mothers are like that, right? So as we go forward, especially from those of us who have the capacity, who have the mandate to keep our hearts open to all beings and all arguments on this side. Let's try to hold that space for a very hot and furious debate, because a lot of people are suffering right now, and more are going to. And may we really keep our sight on the long-term goal to cultivate a wisdom and a compassion big enough that we can really help and influence in all these situations so that no one suffers someday.